There's something uniquely unsettling about driving alone at night. Maybe it's the way the darkness presses in on all sides, the way the highway stretches endlessly ahead, disappearing into nothingness. Or maybe it's the quiet, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow, every flicker in your peripheral vision. I used to think I loved night drives. Until the night I realized I wasn't alone on the road. Until the night I realized someone was following me. And no matter how fast I drove, no matter what I did, they wouldn't let me go. I had been driving for nearly 6 hours. It was supposed to be a simple trip, just a quick drive home after visiting my parents in another state. I had left later than I planned, and by the time I hit the highway, the sun had already set, leaving me with another 3 hours of driving in the dark. I didn't mind. I had done it before. I had my music, my coffee, and an empty highway ahead of me. Or so I thought. The first time I noticed the car, it was just a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. It was a black sedan, nothing unusual, just another vehicle on the road. It wasn't tailgating me or doing anything suspicious, so I didn't think much of it. But after 20 minutes, I realized something. No matter how fast or slow I went, the car stayed behind me. Not too close, not too far, just there, following. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Coincidence. We were both heading in the same direction, nothing more. But as the miles stretched on, the unease in my stomach grew. I switched lanes. The car switched lanes too. I slowed down, letting it pass, but it didn't. Instead, it slowed down with me, maintaining the same exact distance. That's when I knew. This wasn't normal. This wasn't coincidence. Someone was following me. I felt a tightness in my chest, my grip on the steering wheel tightening. What do I do? Should I speed up? Should I call the police? I glanced at my phone in the cup holder. No signal. Perfect. I looked back in the mirror. The black sedan was still there. And then, it flicked its headlights. Just once. Like a warning. Or a signal. A chill ran down my spine. They wanted me to know they were there. My mind raced through every possibility. Was it just some idiot messing around? A drunk driver? Or was it something worse? I tried to shake off the fear creeping up my throat. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe. The car suddenly sped up. My heart jumped as the black sedan surged forward, closing the gap between us. For a second, I thought it was going to ram into me. But at the last second, it swerved into the next lane, riding alongside me, keeping pace, matching my every move. I turned my head just slightly, trying to get a glimpse of the driver. But the windows were pitch black. Too black. Like they weren't tinted. Like they were painted over. I couldn't see inside, but I could feel them watching me. I did the only thing I could think of. I slammed my foot on the gas. The engine roared as my car shot forward, the needle climbing past 80 miles per hour, 85, 90. I didn't care about speeding. I just needed to get away. But then, the black sedan matched my speed. Easily, effortlessly, like it was playing with me. The road stretched ahead, empty, endless. No exits, no signs, just the two of us, locked in some silent, high-speed nightmare. I tried to breathe, tried to think. What did they want? Were they waiting for me to stop? Were they planning to run me off the road? I couldn't let that happen. I had to find a way to lose them. And then, up ahead, I saw it. A gas station. A chance. Without hesitating, I yanked the wheel and swerved into the gas station lot, my tires screeching as I pulled up beside the pumps. For a moment, my heart pounded in relief. I had made it. But then, the black sedan pulled in too. Slow, deliberate. It didn't go to a pump. It just stopped at the edge of the lot, waiting, watching. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I needed to get inside. Now, I threw the car into park, grabbed my phone, and ran. The gas station was mostly empty except for the cashier behind the counter, a bored-looking guy in his 20s. I practically burst through the doors. "Hey man," the cashier said. "You okay?" I turned, pointing through the glass. "That car. Do you see that car?" The cashier glanced outside, frowning. "What car?" I spun around. The black sedan was gone. I felt my stomach drop. My whole body was shaking, my mind racing. Had I imagined it? Had I hallucinated the entire thing? No, I hadn't. I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt. And I knew that somewhere out there, on that dark, empty highway, that car was still waiting. And next time, I might not be so lucky, because whoever, or whatever, was inside it, didn't want to let me go. The thing about road trips is that they never go exactly as planned. You can map out your route, estimate arrival times, plan for fuel stops, but there's always something that throws it off. A flat tire, a wrong turn, bad weather. But those things, they're normal. What happened to us that night? That wasn't normal. That was something else. Something I still don't understand. Something I still see when I close my eyes. Those glowing eyes in the woods. It started as a weekend getaway. Just me and my best friend, Nate, heading up to a secluded cabin in the mountains. The plan was simple. 3 days of hiking, fishing, and unplugging from the world. No work, no stress, just nature and fresh air. The drive took longer than expected. What should have been a 5-hour trip stretched into 7, thanks to construction, detours, and my terrible sense of direction. By the time we were an hour away, the sun was already setting. The last stretch of road was nothing but dense forest on both sides, the trees so thick they swallowed the fading sunlight whole. The two-lane highway wound through the mountains, curving sharply every few miles, and the further we drove, the more I felt like we were the only people left on Earth. That feeling only got worse when Nate cursed under his breath and muttered, "Dude, we have a problem." The dashboard warning light flickered on. Low fuel. I blinked at the glowing icon. How the hell? I thought we had plenty of gas. Nate groaned. You were supposed to stop at that last station. I had meant to, but we had been too busy talking, lost in conversation. Now we were in the middle of nowhere, and my gas gauge was dropping faster than I liked. I pulled out my phone, hoping to find the nearest station. No service. Great. We decided to keep driving, hoping to stumble upon a town or a gas station before we ran out completely. But miles passed and we saw nothing. No signs, no buildings, just an endless tunnel of trees. Then, without warning, the car sputtered. The engine hiccuped, choked, and then silence. We rolled to a stop on the side of the road. Out of gas. Just like that, we were stranded. The silence was deafening. No passing cars. No wind. No rustling leaves. Just stillness. I swallowed hard, forcing a nervous laugh. Well, this sucks. Nate sighed, rubbing his face. What now? I checked the GPS again. Still no service. Then I remembered. The cabin. We're only like a mile from it, right? Nate frowned. Maybe. I think so. It should be just up the road. It wasn't ideal, but it was our best option. Walking 1 mile in the dark was better than sleeping in the car all night. So we grabbed our backpacks, locked the car, and started walking. We had no idea what was waiting for us. At first, it wasn't too bad. The night air was cool, the moon barely visible through the thick trees. Our phone flashlights were dim, but they were enough to light the narrow dirt path leading toward the cabin. Then we heard it. A sound. A rustling in the trees. We both froze. Did you hear that? I whispered. Nate nodded slowly. Probably an animal. That made sense. We were in the woods. Of course there were animals. But then, the rustling came again. Closer. And this time, we saw the eyes. They glowed. A deep, burning orange, floating in the darkness between the trees. Too high off the ground to be a raccoon. Too big to be a deer. The moment we saw them, the rustling stopped. Silence. Those eyes just watched us. Unblinking. Unmoving. I felt my stomach drop. Nate, I whispered. What the hell is that? He didn't answer. He just grabbed my arm and pulled me forward. Keep walking, he muttered under his breath. My legs felt like they were moving through water. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't take my eyes off the thing watching us. And then, a second pair of eyes appeared. Then a third. A fourth. One by one, more sets of burning orange eyes blinked into existence, surrounding us. Watching. Waiting. I felt my breath hitch in my throat. My entire body went cold. There were too many. They were everywhere. We weren't alone. Something was out there. Many somethings. And they weren't afraid of us. They were hunting us. I don't remember making the decision to run. 1 second, we were frozen in place. The next, we were sprinting. Our flashlights bounced wildly, barely illuminating the path ahead. The ground was uneven, full of roots and rocks, but I didn't care. I just ran. Behind us, I could hear branches snapping, leaves crunching. Something was moving, following us, keeping pace. Nate was ahead of me, his breath ragged, his voice hoarse as he yelled out, "There, the cabin." I looked up and saw it, a small wooden structure just ahead, barely visible through the trees. We burst through the clearing, practically throwing ourselves onto the porch. Nate fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped them. The rustling behind us stopped. I turned, breathless, heart hammering, and in the darkness of the trees, dozens of eyes watched from the shadows. Nate finally got the door open. We stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind us. For a long moment, we just stood there, panting, shaking, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No scratching at the door. Just silence. Like nothing had ever been there at all. Neither of us slept that night. We kept the lights on, kept the curtains closed. But as the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching. And when the first light of dawn finally broke through the trees, I made the mistake of looking out the window. The woods were still, but on the dirt path leading to the cabin were footprints, hundreds of them, circling the house. We left that morning, didn't even stay for breakfast. We never spoke about what we saw, never told anyone, because what would we even say? Who would believe us? But I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and I know that somewhere, out there, in those woods, something is still watching. The road twisted and turned as we climbed higher into the mountains, the world around us slowly swallowed by an endless stretch of fog. "Visibility's getting bad," Jake muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. I shifted in my seat, uneasy. "Yeah, maybe we should pull over?" Jake didn't answer right away. He was the kind of guy who always pushed forward, always confident that things would work out. We had been driving for hours, making our way through the back roads of the Rockies, and neither of us wanted to stop for the night before reaching our destination, a remote cabin we had rented for the weekend. The trip was supposed to be an escape, just the two of us, a break from city life, from stress, from everything. But I had a bad feeling, and soon I'd find out I was right to be afraid. The road was narrow, hugging the side of the mountain with no guardrails, no lights, just a sheer drop into darkness on one side. The fog made everything worse, thick, suffocating, like a living thing crawling over the car, blocking out the sky. Jake exhaled sharply. "All right, man. We'll pull over at the next wide spot and wait for it to clear." But we never got that chance, because something darted into the road. A shadow, too fast, too sudden. Jake cursed and yanked the wheel. The tires screeched. The car skidded. And before I could even scream, we were falling. The world flipped. Metal crunched. Glass shattered. I felt my body slam against the seatbelt, my head snapping forward as the car rolled. Once, twice, 3 times, before coming to a jarring, deafening stop. Everything went silent. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, I heard Jake's voice, weak, shaky. "Tom, you okay?" I swallowed the coppery taste of blood. Yeah, but that was a lie, because as I looked around, I realized something horrifying. We weren't just off the road. We were hanging over the edge of the mountain. The car was tilted forward, the front end wedged against a cluster of broken trees, the back half resting on the loose, rocky slope. Beyond the windshield was nothing but darkness. If the trees gave way, if the ground beneath us crumbled, we'd plummet hundreds of feet to our deaths. I forced my breath to slow, fighting back panic. "We have to move. Carefully." Jake nodded, wincing as he shifted. He had a gash on his forehead, blood dripping onto his shirt, but otherwise, he seemed okay. We had to get out. Now. But then, the car creaked and started sliding forward. We froze. A sharp, groaning protest of metal filled the air as the car shifted an inch closer to the edge. We had seconds, maybe less, before it went over completely. Jake moved first. He reached for his seatbelt, fingers fumbling with the buckle. Click. It came loose. He braced himself, moving with slow, deliberate movements, trying not to jolt the car. I did the same. Every breath, every shift of weight, felt dangerous. Like even the smallest movement might be too much. Then the car slid again. Faster this time. The front wheels dropped lower, tilting us even further forward. I grabbed at the dashboard, my pulse hammering. Jake. I know, he gritted out. We go on 3. I nodded, swallowing the terror rising in my throat. 1. The car groaned. 2. The trees below snapped. 3. We lunged. We threw ourselves toward the back seat, scrambling out the shattered rear window just as the car lurched forward. For a split second, it teetered, balanced between staying and falling. And then, it went over. I barely had time to register what was happening before the car plunged into the darkness below, disappearing into the fog. We lay there, panting, watching as the red glow of the taillights vanished. Then, a distant crash. Then silence. Jake and I looked at each other. We had survived, but we weren't safe yet. Not even close. The reality of our situation settled in quickly. We were alone, stranded on the side of a mountain with no car, no phone service, and no way to call for help. And then, the fog shifted, and I saw it. Something moving in the trees below. Something that wasn't human. I grabbed Jake's arm. Did you see that? He squinted into the darkness, still breathing hard. See what? Then the movement came again. A shape, just barely visible through the mist, tall, hunched, unnatural. It wasn't walking. It was crawling, towards the wreckage of our car. Jake saw it now. His entire body went rigid. What the hell is that? He whispered. I had no answer. I just knew we needed to get out of here. Now, we turned, moving quickly up the slope, trying to put as much distance between us and that thing as possible. But then, it stopped, and it looked at us. A pair of glowing white eyes cut through the fog. They were too large, too wide, too hungry. Then, it moved, not toward the wreck, toward us. We ran. Branches whipped against my arms, my legs burned, but I didn't care. I didn't look back, because I could hear it now. The sound of something huge, something unnatural, moving through the trees. Fast, too fast. I heard Jake shout something, but then, a horrible, guttural screech. So loud it felt like it was inside my skull. Then, silence. We didn't stop running until we saw the lights. A ranger's station, barely visible through the fog. We practically fell through the door, gasping for breath. The ranger on duty looked up, startled. Jesus, you guys okay? We weren't, but we were alive. They found our wrecked car the next morning, but when we asked about the thing in the woods, the ranger only frowned. There's nothing out there but wildlife, he said. Maybe a bear. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night, when I close my eyes, I still see those glowing eyes in the fog, watching, waiting, for the next unlucky travelers to come crashing down the mountain. I've always loved road trips. Something about the open highway, the endless stretch of road ahead, the hum of the engine beneath me. It was my version of peace. Driving alone at night was even better. No distractions, no traffic, just me, the stars, and the occasional song crackling through the radio. That's why, when I got the idea to take a last-minute, late-night road trip to clear my head, I didn't hesitate. I packed a small bag, grabbed some snacks, and hit the road just before midnight. The plan was simple. Drive until I got tired, find a cheap motel or sleep in my car, then head back in the morning. It was supposed to be just another solo adventure, but I had no idea that I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. The first couple of hours were smooth. The highway stretched on forever, a winding black ribbon cutting through the empty countryside. There were barely any other cars, just the occasional trucker hauling cargo through the night. The neon glow of gas station signs flickered past every now and then, offering promises of food and fuel, but I didn't need either. At least, not yet. By the time I noticed the low fuel warning, I was in the middle of nowhere. I cursed under my breath and checked my GPS. The closest gas station was another 30 miles ahead. Not ideal, but manageable. But then I spotted the rest stop. A faded blue sign on the side of the highway read, "Rest area, 1 mile." I hesitated. I didn't need a break, but my legs were getting stiff, and I figured I could use the bathroom while I was there. Besides, it was probably safer to stretch now rather than risk falling asleep at the wheel later. So, without overthinking it, I took the exit. And that's where I screwed up. The rest stop was completely deserted. As I pulled into the lot, my headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the small building in front of me. A couple of vending machines stood near the entrance, their dim, flickering lights barely visible. A few empty cars were scattered around the lot, but I didn't see a single person. Something about it felt off. I told myself it was just the isolation, the eerie quiet of being alone in the middle of the night. But a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that I should just keep driving. I ignored it. Big mistake. I parked near the entrance, leaving my car running as I stepped out. The air was cool, the distant hum of highway traffic barely audible. The bathroom was just a few feet away, the door slightly ajar. I hesitated again, but then shook it off. I was just being paranoid. I pushed the door open. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered, casting long shadows across the dingy tile floor. A row of stalls lined one side, while 2 sinks sat against the opposite wall. The place smelled faintly of mildew and old cleaning supplies. I stepped inside and did my business as quickly as possible, my ears straining for any sound beyond the steady drip, drip, drip of a leaky faucet. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. Someone else was inside the restroom with me. I froze. The sound was faint but deliberate, slow, measured steps moving across the floor. My pulse spiked, my mind racing through every possibility. Maybe it was just another traveler. Maybe I hadn't noticed them walk in, but I hadn't heard the door open. I swallowed hard and finished up, forcing myself to stay calm. I stepped out of the stall, my eyes scanning the dimly lit space. The room was empty, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it. A prickling sensation crawled up my spine, my instinct screaming at me to get out. I turned toward the exit, my footsteps quick, purposeful, and that's when I saw him, standing right in front of the door, blocking the only way out. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face. His hands were stuffed into his pockets, his stance casual, like he had all the time in the world. I stopped dead in my tracks. Neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy, suffocating. Then, slowly, too slowly, he tilted his head. "You got a light?" he asked. His voice was low, almost friendly. I swallowed hard, forcing a nervous laugh. No, man. Sorry." He didn't move, didn't blink. Then, in the same calm tone, he said, "You got a wallet?" A cold wave of fear crashed over me. This wasn't some random traveler. This was a setup, and I had walked right into it. I forced myself to stay calm. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble." His smile widened. "Neither do I," he said. "So why don't you be smart and hand over your keys?" My heart slammed against my ribs. My keys were in my pocket. If I gave them to him, I was screwed. But if I didn't, before I could decide, something cold pressed against my ribs. A knife. I sucked in a sharp breath as I felt the sharp edge of the blade press against my shirt. I was trapped. And then, a second man stepped into the room. This one was shorter, stockier, his face partially hidden by a baseball cap. He stood near the sinks, blocking the rest of the room, his arms crossed. 2 against 1. No way out. The man with the knife grinned. "Now, let's try this again," he said. "Hand over your keys." My mind was screaming. Think, think, think. Then, from outside, the sound of a car pulling up. It was enough of a distraction. The second man turned his head for just a second, and I took my chance. I elbowed the guy with the knife, hard, right in the ribs. He let out a grunt of pain as I bolted toward the door, shoving past him with all my strength. I burst into the parking lot, gasping for air, and ran straight into someone. A trucker, a real traveler, someone who wasn't part of the setup. The 2 men must have realized they were out of time, because by the time I turned back, they were gone. The trucker looked at me, confused. "You okay, kid?" I could barely breathe, but I was alive. The police never caught them. They found my stolen wallet and phone ditched in a field a few miles away. But the men who tried to rob me? Gone. I never took another late-night road trip after that. Because now I know, some roads should never be traveled alone. There are two kinds of people in this world. Those who pick up hitchhikers and those who don't. I had always been in the second group. I wasn't heartless. I'd heard all the stories, the urban legends, the horror movies based on real-life incidents. The last thing I wanted was to be one of those stories. So no matter how lost or desperate someone looked, I kept driving. That is, until one night, during a road trip with my two best friends, we made a mistake. A mistake that still haunts me to this day. It was the middle of summer, and the three of us, Ben, Matt, and me, had planned an epic road trip across several states. We had no strict itinerary, just a general route, a cooler full of snacks, and enough caffeine to keep us awake for days. That particular night, we had been driving for hours down a long, empty stretch of highway. It was one of those roads where civilization just seemed to disappear. No gas stations, no streetlights, just an endless, winding road cutting through miles of dark forest. It was past midnight, and exhaustion was setting in. Matt was at the wheel, I was in the passenger seat, and Ben was half asleep in the back, snoring softly against the window. Then we saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road, standing just outside the reach of our headlights. At first, he was nothing more than a shadowy outline against the trees. But as we got closer, the headlights illuminated him in a sudden, eerie flash. He was tall, thin, wearing a long black coat that looked too heavy for the summer heat. His hair was stringy and unkempt, and his skin, what little we could see of it, looked pale and sickly. His arm was raised, his thumb pointing stiffly upward. A hitchhiker. Matt slowed the car just slightly, enough to get a better look. "Dude, don't stop," I said immediately, my stomach twisting. Matt hesitated. "I mean, it's the middle of nowhere. He might need help." Ben, now half awake in the back, groaned. "Or he might be an axe murderer. Keep driving." I expected Matt to agree, to hit the gas and leave the guy behind like any sane person would. But instead, he pulled over. "Are you serious?" I snapped, my pulse already racing. Matt shrugged. "Come on, man. What if his car broke down? You'd want someone to stop for you." I turned in my seat, giving Ben a desperate look. But Ben just sighed and rubbed his eyes. "Fine, but if he smells like death, we kick him out." The hitchhiker was already walking toward the car, his long coat swaying with each step. My entire body screamed at me to lock the doors, tell Matt to drive, do anything but let this guy in. But before I could say anything, Matt rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" The man stopped just outside the car, his face now fully visible in the dim glow of the overhead light. His eyes were sunken, surrounded by deep, dark circles. His lips stretched into a smile, but there was something off about it. Something too wide, too forced. "Yes," he said. His voice was flat, almost robotic. For a second, none of us moved. Then, Matt unlocked the doors, and the man got in. The air inside the car changed instantly. It felt heavier, colder. The hitchhiker slid into the back seat beside Ben, moving stiffly, as if his limbs weren't working quite right. He didn't set down a bag, didn't adjust his coat, didn't do anything normal. He just sat there. Matt pulled back onto the road. "So, where are you headed?" The man was silent for a long time. Then, in that same flat tone, he said, "Anywhere." Ben shot me a look. "Oh, what the hell does that mean?" "Look." I swallowed hard. "Okay, how long you been out here?" The man turned his head slightly, but not toward me. He stared at the side window, as if watching something we couldn't see. "Too long." I shivered. Something was wrong with this guy. For the next 10 minutes, the ride was silent. Matt tried putting on music, but the second the radio crackled to life, the hitchhiker's head snapped toward it. And then, he reached forward and turned it off. "No music," he said. His voice was deeper now, as if it were coming from somewhere else. Nobody argued. Nobody said a word. I tried to ignore the way he kept fidgeting, his hands twitching, his head tilting ever so slightly from side to side. I tried to ignore the way he breathed. Slow, rattling inhales, like he was struggling to pull air into his lungs. And then, just as I was starting to convince myself we were overreacting, he laughed, softly, under his breath, like he had just remembered something really, really funny. I felt my blood run cold. Ben's voice was tight. "What's funny?" The hitchhiker kept laughing. Then, he lunged forward. His hands shot toward the steering wheel, yanking it violently to the side. The car swerved. Matt shouted, trying to fight back control, but the man's grip was inhumanly strong. "What the hell?" I yelled, grabbing at his arms. Ben punched him in the shoulder. Hard. The man jerked back, his breathing ragged, uneven, and for the first time, he looked directly at me. His eyes weren't right. They were too dark, too hollow, like there was nothing inside him at all. Matt slammed on the brakes. "Get out!" he shouted, turning to face the man. The hitchhiker didn't move. His breathing was louder now, shallow gasps filling the car. His hands trembled in his lap, his fingers curling and uncurling. Then, he smiled, and he whispered, "You should never have stopped." I hit the door lock. The second the sound clicked, the man's head snapped toward me. And then, he lunged again. But this time, Ben was ready. He shoved the door open, slamming into the man's side. The hitchhiker tumbled out of the car, hitting the pavement with a sickening thud. Matt didn't wait. He floored it. We didn't stop driving until we reached a gas station miles away. When we finally looked back, the road was empty. No hitchhiker, no car, nothing. Like he had never been there at all. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. You should never have stopped. I haven't stopped for a hitchhiker since, and I never will.